Hi everyone, greetings from ISAR. This is Dr. Jaydeep Malhotra, President ISAR. I'm very happy today to be the first speaker for our Seed to Soil series. And I thought it was appropriate that we have a very broad-based topic today so that most of the infertility specialists in the country and abroad can actually understand what is the right time and a right choice of treatment for the population of infertile patient who comes to us. Dear friends, the desire to excel is exclusive of the fact whether someone appreciates it or not. Excellence is a drive from inside and not outside. And it's not for someone else to notice, but for your own satisfaction and efficiency that you really want to excel. The time, 11:47 p.m., the date, 25th of July, the year 1978, to every childless couple, hope was born. And that was Louis Brown, the first IVF baby of the world. Now we have to understand that for science, it is necessary to know history. It was not in a day that an IVF baby was born in the world. There was a very steep learning curve and years of committed labor in pursuit of excellence. More than 300 women actually underwent IVF and had their oocytes removed without any success before Louis Brown was actually conceived. Now, why did this happen? In spite of the learning curve, choosing the right intervention at the right time for infertility treatment is really important, because the goal for every couple is having a baby. Live birth is something which is really important for them. But we as practitioners need to understand that the probability of conception depends on a lot of things. It depends on what's the age of the couple, what is the length of exposure of their trying time, what is the coital frequency, and many other things. And if you see here in this diagram, where we have age and the number of months of trying, so for younger couples, it takes much lesser time to conceive if they're not using any contraceptive methods. But as we grow older, the chances of getting conception are they take much longer. And that's very important for us to understand. So the first and the foremost thing which is important for us is to understand that we need to provide services or an aggressive management to a couple depending upon their age. I'm very happy to say that I was in the terminology committee of WHO when for almost 6 years we fought in actually adding this word in the definition of infertility. So today we define infertility as a disease. And it's important for us to understand, because once disease is there in the definition, then probably tomorrow a lot of insurance and every cover will come for our infertile patients, which is one of our major challenges. So infertility is a disease that is defined by a failure to achieve a clinical pregnancy after 12 months or more of regular unprotected intercourse. That's what we call as primary infertility. Now, approximately 50% of the couples, you may do the basic workup, but no major causes found. Now, that makes it much more difficult for us. And that also makes us understand that we need to have personalized management strategies based on their individual characteristics. And there we can have a tailor-made protocol for all of them. Now, when we do this, another very important fact which we need to understand is that for a couple who comes to us, there are many important things. And one of the most important thing is time to pregnancy. How much time will actually be spent from this couple who comes to us in the clinic to initiate all the workup and to achieve a single live birth? And that is something which probably most of us in a protocol-based management forget. And I must emphasize here that this should be included as an aspect of decision-making process for all women of all ages. Also, special importance should be given to women who are more than the age of 35 years, because we all understand that fertility declines with age. And of course, this decline is much more accelerated as soon as a woman crosses 35. Along with that, it's not only the decline in the fertility, but also the aneuploidy rates in these women are much more once they are more than 35. Another important aspect which we have to also consider is that a lot of patients, if we are not really explaining to them the roadmap of how this journey of the infertility treatment is going to go ahead, actually drop out. So for us, it is also very important that we spend a little time and explain to them how the roadmap is going to be and what are the procedures which will be there involving this journey. Now, measuring success in infertility treatment. Most of us actually look into outcomes and costs. And that is what our patients are also worried about. And as I said, there is a third very important aspect of time, which is also an important aspect in measuring success as far as infertility treatment is concerned. So right from initiation of the treatment to a live birth is something which should be minimal, and the journey has to be as smooth as possible. So here is a turning point today between the traditional management and the active management. So we are all hoping that we will be able to provide some very active management for these couples who come to us. Let's start with evaluation. Now, we have to evaluate the couple as a unit. So this disease is a two-patient disorder. It's not only a woman or a male who is at fault. So both of them have to be thoroughly evaluated, counseled, and included in the decision-making process. Because unless and until both of them are counseled, most of the times it happens that the male fizzles out of the treatment and it's difficult for the women to cope up. And there it makes achievement of our goals extremely difficult. We start with a thorough history and examination. We do the basic investigations, which I don't really need to go into, but I'm sure all of you understand. And it always starts with the semen analysis. And I emphasize here, always start with the semen analysis, because much easier and much lesser time consuming and absolutely hardly any cost. But when we do the semen analysis, we need to understand that there is a high degree of overlap in semen characteristics between fertile and infertile women. Men. And it's very difficult for us to say, unless and until there are some gross abnormalities in the semen, like azoospermia or globosospermia, it's difficult for us to predict the differences between a fertile and a non-fertile semen parameters. So it's very important that we counsel the patient accordingly. Now, most of the times, semen analysis comprises of sperm concentration, motility, and morphology. Now, WHO defines a normal semen parameters as where the concentration is 15 million per ml with 32% of progressively motile sperms and the presence of the sperm with a standard morphology. Now, for morphology, there are no parameters which have been provided by WHO in this definition. But we have to understand that now, based on these this definition, the semen analysis outcomes, we can actually have a guide towards managing these men and make a decision. And also basically the choice of expectant management can be made out on these semen parameters, whether this is an absolutely normal parameters and a natural conception is possible if a woman is absolutely normal, or we need to do IUI, IVF, or ICSI. Now we can also have a little bit added value of some of the sperm function tests, though they are not very routinely performed. Now in 2000, Balash came with a paper and they said that individualized pre-treatment assessment can actually have 5 categories which could be grouped as semen analysis, postcoital test, assessment of ovulation, uterine and tubal evaluation, and laparoscopy. Now, these are the 5 parameters which could probably guide us towards what this couple actually has, the problems, and then maximize the treatment outcomes. But I would say in our country, we are very, very good in transvaginal ultrasound examination, and transvaginal ultrasound examination right in the first go gives us a lot of information as far as the anatomy, physiology, and endocrinology of the woman and the man is concerned. So I would really like to remove postcoital test from here and put transvaginal ultrasound examination in place. Because once we are evaluating a woman with, especially with infertility with ultrasound, whether we do a transperineal or transvaginal ultrasound, right from the cervix to the vagina, to the uterus, to the tubes, ovaries, and even the general abdominal scan can give us a lot of information about the status of this woman. And then along with this, monitoring of all the treatments and the complications and the interventional procedures, and even if ART is required, all can be very well monitored by ultrasound. So we always start with a baseline scan on ultrasound, which should be basically performed on day 2, ideally. But I would say perform it on any day when the patient comes to you. Look for the normal anatomy, definitely first, and then try and rule out if there's any presence of ovarian cysts, whether there's PCOS or the hydrosalpinges like you can see here, or endometriomas, polyps, fibroids, or irregular shedding of the endometrium if you're starting for an IUI cycle on day 2. Now, all these are really, really important. But it's not only, let me say, ultrasound will not only give you information about these, but if we say, look at this example here, that's an endometrioma, but I'm not really worried about this unilateral endometrioma. I'm more worried about what is a normal ovarian tissue like, whether there are some antral follicles there or no. If tomorrow in a 3 centimeter unilateral endometrioma, I want to go ahead and stimulate this patient, will I get some good eggs or no? And similarly, for polycystic ovary, we could actually measure the stroma. We can look at the number of antral follicles. We can look at the stromal blood flow. And it can actually tell you whether this patient is likely to have hyperstimulation or no. And so ultrasound actually gives us a lot of insight into many more things. Another very important insight which ultrasound gives us is that when we are monitoring the patient through the follicle monitoring cycle, the synchrony between the endometrium and the follicle is very important. And if you see that the follicle is growing at about 2 millimeters a day and the endometrium grows at about 0.5 millimeters a day, and in the peri-ovulatory period, the follicle is about 17-18 millimeters, the endometrium is 7 millimeters plus, with good blood flow in zone 3 and 4 here, you know that this is an ideal cycle for a good outcome. Similarly, if you have blood flow studies or the color Doppler available with you, you could do the uterine artery blood flow along with the endometrial blood flow or subendometrial blood flow, and then find out whether this cycle is actually optimum or no. So here you can see there is hardly any diastolic flow. That's early follicular phase, that's the late follicular phase, as a peri-ovulatory period. And along with that, the endometrium is growing and the blood flow to the endometrium is also increasing. So this is probably a good cycle for me to either do timed intercourse or prescribe IUI or whatsoever. Now, along with it, the ultrasound, you could do a uterine and tubal evaluation. Now, tubal evaluation can be very well done with HSG. Transvaginal ultrasound along with saline infusion sonohystrography is another mode for tubal evaluation. Very few cases you may require MRI or laparoscopy, hysteroscopy. Now, HSG is probably right now worthwhile doing in an initial stage assessment of tubal evaluation. But if required, and if there are women who are HSG positive findings and laparoscopy is the next step forward. And I would suggest that whenever we are doing laparoscopy, laparoscopy should always be double puncture laparoscopy, and in case if there are any positive findings, and it should be immediately converted into therapeutic laparoscopy so that you don't waste time and cost for doing another procedure. And laparoscopy should always be combined with hysteroscopy so that we do a complete evaluation. Next, when I say come to assessment of ovarian reserve. Now, initially, we used to do a day 2 serum FSH, which I think we no longer use it. What we are now using is AMH, AFC, and these are the two very important parameters which will actually tell us or give an insight into what the ovarian reserve of the woman is, and they are pretty much independent of the day of the cycle. And that again is very important because infertility patients, not all of them come on day 2. So you could actually do both the tests at any time of the cycle with a fair amount of accuracy. What would we depend on? I would say age is one of the good parameters to depend on because age actually tells you about the quality. Then the antral follicle count is important, and of course AMH is also important wherever you want to actually rule out or pick up the extremes of ovarian reserve, especially to make some changes in the treatment protocols which are really required. Now, if you see here, we have a lot of these biomarkers which are available, but AMH is somewhere, when you combine AMH with AFC, it really helps you in a stratified treatment management protocol choice, where based on AMH and AFC, you could actually choose what kind of a protocol you're going to customize for this particular couple. And if you see here, I've just converted these picomoles into nanograms because in our country, we use nanograms as per ml as the measure for AMH. So if the AMH is less than 0.2, there is actually negligible response. And this is a patient where she might now have to go ahead with third-party egg donation. But between 1 and 3, nanograms per ml, these are normal responders. And if the AMH is more than 5 or let's say 3.5 is what we normally say, then chances of having hyperresponse or hyperstimulation are more. So the stimulation protocols need to be customized. So what are the prognostic factors for optimizing success in IVF? I would say for any infertility treatment, not only IVF, maternal age is one of the most important criteria, because we know that with the age of more than 35 or older, there are significantly lower chances of pregnancy and significantly higher chances of having an aneuploidic pregnancy. So what is happening is that if you see here, with age, the fertility of the woman goes down. And in case if she gets pregnant also, the chances of having miscarriages are very, very high as age advances, because the oocyte aneuploidy is very much common after about 35 years of age. Second important factor which plays its role is the duration of subfertility. Now, we normally say if a couple has been trying and has been subfertile for a period of exceeding more than 12 months, the chances of pregnancy are a little lower than a couple who has a subfertility of less than 12 months. Then does type of subfertility actually have a role to play? Though there has been no consensus till now on this, but we say that women with either when they have male subfertility or tubal subfertility or subfertility caused by endometriosis have slightly lower chances of pregnancy as compared to women who have or couples who have unexplained infertility. Secondly, there are many other parameters which can play their role. And obesity is one which definitely has its implications. So if you see here, the implantation, the clinical pregnancy rates and live birth rate all are actually gradually going to go down as a woman moves from lean to towards obesity. And there is a definite impact and implication of obesity on all the three parameters. Now, a lot of us actually are very fond of doing postcoital tests. I'd just like to bring to your attention here and say that even according to ASRM way back in 2006, the routine use of PCT actually is not really recommended. As I was talking about laparoscopy, we know that there is, for diagnostic laparoscopy, there is very limited role, because today we have very high resolution machines for ultrasound, which will give us a lot of insight into the abdomen. But if laparoscopy has to be performed, you must be able to convert it into an operative laparoscopy, or only perform it for patients who have either transvaginal hysterosalpingography or SSG or sonosalpingography positive cases. And when you're doing a laparoscopy, please combine it with hysteroscopy. Do a double puncture laparoscopy. Always lift the ovary and see the ovarian fossa, because endometriosis starts from there. If you see some tubercles like this, you must take a biopsy, and always after finishing the procedure, turn the laparoscope around in the perihepatic region and look for these adhesions, because they will give you an insight into chlamydial or other kinds of infections. And hysteroscopy, so many times it is possible that you may have missed out on some ultrasound investigations, and you pick up a small subtle adhesions or a small septum. So if that happens, then the surgery should be performed for them immediately. Now, all of us know that there could be, at any point of time, different angles and different points of view. Now, what is important today here is that based on all these investigations which we have done, we need to now understand what protocol we are going to follow for these couples. So, based on the investigations, if you have a couple where they are finding only a single defect, now if the defect is very easily correctable, then pregnancy is going to result sooner. Now, if the defect is not easily correctable, then the chances of pregnancy are maybe negligible. Let's say if it is severe Asherman's, you know that pregnancy is not going to happen. Or if there is a septum or a uterus diadelphus where pregnancy has not happened, then probably ART is going to help. Or let's say tubal block is there where nothing else is going to happen, then you know that ART is going to help such a couple. The problem arises where multiple defects are there. And once multiple defects are there, then their chances of having a pregnancy with minimal intervention are lesser. And these are the couples where you might require assisted reproductive technology. Now, wherever there are no defects, like unexplained infertility, you might need some further investigations, and then treat them with superovulation and IUI. Some of them will definitely get pregnant, and the others who don't get pregnant will have to then resort to ART. So all our main management protocols, we know that there are different types of management protocols which are available to us. One could be just medical management, like for dysovulatory infertility, you have medical management. Surgical management, where you have some correctable uterine defects or ovarian endometriomas and so on. And ART, where none of these are going to work, then these are the patients who would actually go ahead for assisted reproductive technology. And there will be a few with those multiple defects who might require a combined treatment, like medical, surgical, or surgical plus ART, or medical plus ART. Let me just tell you here that it is very important for us to make the patient understand that in which group they actually fall in before we start treating them. Because we have here a favorable group where you know that the age is less than 37 years, the duration of infertility is less than 7 years, the baseline FSH, which if you are looking at, is less than 10, or we have an AMH, which is not less than, or more than 1. There is absence of any adnexal lump or tubo-ovarian mass or chocolate cyst. Pelvic adhesions are not present or they are minimum, and the basal antral follicle count is more than 6. Uterine shape is normal and there is no previous history of any failed procedure. And if all these parameters are not there, then they actually go into falling into an unfavorable group where the age is more than 37. Duration of infertility is also more than 7 years. FSH or let us say AMH is less than 1, and there is presence of any adnexal lump or pelvic adhesions. Antral follicle count is low, less than 6. The uterine shape is not normal, and there may be a history of previous failed ART procedure. So when we have a favorable group where you could have anovulation as the commonest of them, early endometriosis, unexplained infertility, mild anatomical defects, or mild oligospermia. Now, this is a group which is easier to treat, and this is a group which probably with medical or management or surgical management or will be successful with IUI and will not need much further management unless and until some subset of patients might not be successful and they might have to then go to ART. But the unfavorable group, for example, where you have advanced endometriosis, uterine synechias, azo or asthenospermia, or dense pelvic adhesions, these are the patients who are difficult to treat. So counseling for them is very, very important, and they will require a much more active management as much as possible. Many a times we see hydrosalpinges. We may also subject these patients to ART. And I would stop here and like to tell each and every one of you that even when we do ART, hydrosalpinge has a negative effect on the clinical outcome of pregnancy. So these patients should be encouraged to undergo prophylactic salpingectomy before undertaking any procedure of assisted reproductive technology. Anovulation. Almost 40% of the patients who come to our clinics have ovulatory disorders. And out of these 40%, almost about 80% plus will be PCOS, and only about 15 to 20% will be others. And these mostly can be very easily treated with good ovarian stimulation protocols, which can be designed for the patient themselves. Now, coming to active management of infertility. Now, what do we really, let me just take a minute here and explain to you what is active management of infertility. When we say active management, we say that you should not be spending more than a month on investigations. Lot of times what we do is we will call the patient in 1 month for a day 2 examination, then call them again on the next month, 7th day for a hysterosalpingogram, and then for follicle monitoring, and then for, so by the time the investigations are complete, almost about 30 to 50% of the patients have actually dropped out. So during the first visit itself, if we counsel them and say that, okay, this is the way we are going to go ahead, in the first month itself, you have to come for at least about 3 times, and the whole list of investigations can be completed, where on the first visit on day 2, you could do the day 2 hormone analysis, do a baseline scan, call them on day 7, you could look at the follicle growth, do an HSG, then call them back around the day 12 to 14, depending upon when you feel that the ovulation is going to take place. Look at the endometrial follicle synchrony, and that will again give you a lot of insight into the hormone analysis, and document ovulation, and if possible, call them about 5 days later after ovulation and look at the secretory changes, and your investigations, maximum investigations for infertility are actually complete. For the male, on the first day itself, a semen analysis is what is required and can be done. If he has any problems, then the further investigations can be, or hormone analysis can be recommended as and when possible or wherever applicable. Now, based on these investigations, then we go ahead and then counsel the patient on when certain intervention is required. And the first intervention, which probably for we do, is intrauterine insemination, and which is much more cost effective. And I would say, though it can be done for natural cycle, but ovarian stimulation, controlled ovarian stimulation, when not more than 3 follicles are there, IUI will give us the optimum results and is very, very affordable. Another very important aspect which I would like all of us to understand is that we are very fond of giving ovarian stimulation and doing timed intercourse. We need to understand, for a normal patient, giving ovarian stimulation and timed intercourse actually does not reduce time to pregnancy. Plus, it is also depleting the ovarian reserve. So if a patient is normally ovulating, there is absolutely no need for us to give any ovarian stimulation unless and until we are looking at unexplained infertility and IUI. And that is where clomiphene citrates or letrozole along with IUI would probably give us the best results. The most common indications, I know that most all of us, when the patient comes to us, IUI is something which we subject them to. It's not really correct. I would say that the common indications are mild male factor, if there's a cervical factor, and if there's an unexplained infertility, and sometimes also mild endometriosis. And these are the only good indications for IUI and will give us optimum results. As I said, the use of ovarian stimulation with IUI actually will give us a definitely much better result. But our aim has to be that even with IUI, we should be looking at a singleton healthy pregnancy. Many times I have seen where ovarian patients do respond much more even to a small dose of clomiphene. And if there are more than 3 follicles coming up, I would suggest please cancel that cycle, or if there are more than 5 follicles, convert it into an ART cycle. Now, all this counseling has to happen before we start the treatment, especially for PCOS, where you know that she can hyper-respond. So we must definitely weigh the risks of multiple pregnancies and IUI, and that's important for us and even the patient to understand, because the patient gets totally deterred by the hidden costs, and multiple pregnancies have many problems later on, where the abortion rates are higher, embryo reduction costs will be there, then prematurity, and then handicap and all those things. And I don't think we are actually looking at, adding pain to their problems. One of the most important things when we are doing an assessment for IUI cycles, and I would say the number of cycles, the best results would actually come in the first 4 cycles. If required, we could probably go up to 6. There are some guidelines which do say that till about 12 cycles of IUI can be considered, but definitely more than 6 attempts, there is a considerable decrease in the pregnancy rates with IUI. So whenever we are making a decision, we have to keep in mind that the couple's choice is important, the period of infertility and the cause of infertility, all are important whenever we are deciding on the number of cycles. And along with that, age of the couple is also very, very important. Now, semen parameters also are quite a limiting factor. So which are the patients whom we will be able to, take up and have optimum results with IUI? I would say when an average of about 5 million motile sperms are present minimum, then chances of pregnancy with IUI are okay. So we are looking at 5 to 20 million motile sperms in an IUI inseminate sample for good optimum results. Sometimes with PCOS, in spite of doing everything, we definitely start with lifestyle modification, and if they're anovulatory, then we are looking at adding some ovarian stimulation protocols into place. But in spite of doing all those things, sometimes these patients really do not respond as well as we normally expect. Obesity can be an important cause in them. A lot of times there is poor oocyte quality which is there. In PCOS, we can also have altered endometrial responsiveness. And we know that for every unit of an increase in BMI, there is a reduction of pregnancy rates by 2%. So as I was saying, about 30% of the patients who come to any infertility clinic actually have PCOS. And we really need to understand that after investigations, when Jansi have done a full investigation along with their profile, if there is no ovulation detected and they are obese or overweight, then the first thing which we need to do is counsel to them lifestyle modification. I would not tell anyone to jump to bariatric surgery. Bariatric surgery is something which even after performing, the patient may do good for maybe 1 year, but they'll start putting on weight if lifestyle has not been inculcated into them. So we really need to understand that bariatric surgery will be the second option in case if in a stipulated good amount of time, about 6 months to 9 months in a young patient, if they're not able to control weight, then we could probably think of it in gross obesity. Now, after ovulation, with loss of weight, if ovulation is detected, then most of the times we tell them to wait for natural conception for the next 6 to 9 months. If no pregnancy happens, then, or if no ovulation happens, then we need to do ovarian stimulation either with clomiphene or letrozole. If again with clomiphene and letrozole, if there is no satisfactory ovulation detection, then we could probably move on to gonadotropins, and clomiphene with metformin also gives us good results. Now, as of now, we normally do not recommend laparoscopic ovarian drilling, but there could be still some cases where this might be required. The ones who actually do not respond to gonadotropins or are clomiphene resistant, or the cost of gonadotropins is much higher, or because the dose required is much higher, or if the ovarian size sometimes is really large. Those are the patients where with high LH, ovarian drilling can be taken up with due understanding. And once we do ovarian drilling, not more than 4 punctures per ovary is an important aspect which needs to be considered. Now, once they ovulate, if either with clomiphene or letrozole, then again about 6 cycles of ovarian stimulation should be recommended. If they don't get pregnant, then we should be looking into gonadotropin stimulation with IUI, and if no pregnancy with that or no ovulation, then we are looking at a little higher dose and ART. So this is how we actually go about with the PCOS patients. And then the next important aspect which we move on is endometriosis. And endometriosis again is very much controversial. What are the size of the endometriomas where I should be considering a surgical management? Should be I be offering normal course of action for grade 3 or 4? So here again we are very clear that if the age is less than 35 years and if the grade of endometriosis is only grade 1 and 2, then we could actually look into either expectant management in a young couple or ovulation induction with IUI as a first line therapy. But if the age is more than 35 years, then aggressive management is very important. And here again with the mild disease, ovulation induction in IUI for not more than 3 cycles, and IVF may be considered at an earlier stage. With stage 3 and 4 endometriosis, conservative surgery with laparoscopy followed by GnRH analogs for a month or 2, and then an early decision for an IVF cycle is going to give us the best results. Coming to fibroids. Now fibroids, you can see the FIGO classification here. Now all fibroids need not be removed. The only ones which we need to remove are these 0 or 1, which are actually in the cavity or are submucous fibroids. Sometimes there could be an intramural fibroid which is jutting into the cavity, and this is the number 2. Now these are the ones which might affect pregnancy rates, and they might need to be removed. Otherwise, any other fibroid need not be removed. So we have to really, look into this and understand that surgery is sometimes not the option. So what the recommendations actually say, that in women with infertility, an effort should be made to adequately evaluate and classify the fibroids, particularly those impinging on the endometrial cavity. And this can be very easily done by a transvaginal ultrasound. A 3D ultrasound is actually great in this assessment. If required, hysteroscopy or hysterosonography or MRI can be done, but I would actually say that I would put this patient or subject this patient to hysteroscopy when I know that I might need a removal of the fibroid or a polyp which is there. Submucous fibroids are the ones which can be very easily managed hysteroscopically. Sometimes, controversies arise. What should be the size of these fibroids? Less than 5 centimeters can very easily be removed. But if there are larger submucous fibroids, you might have to do it in 2 sittings. Don't hesitate. Go ahead and do it in 2 sittings instead of, putting the patient's life into some kind of a complication or jeopardy. It is okay to do the procedure in 2 attempts. And definitely hysterosalpingogram is not an appropriate examination to evaluate fibroids. Lastly, I would say for infertile patients, the important thing which we probably miss out on examination and even in history is the sexual dysfunction. Please do not ignore. Definitely take a good history about the coital frequency and if they have any other problems or sexual disorders in place. Also do a proper examination and look for hypospadias or with a history of vaginismus. Could be with most of the diabetics have, sometimes retrograde ejaculation or impotence. We must spend a little time to take this history properly, because once taken the history and examination, these patients can be helped with very minor change in our protocols. So I'd like to say here that selection of treatment modality basically depends on the age of the woman, the duration of subfertility, the semen parameters, the tubal status, and also the presence of other etiological factors along with PCOS, endometriosis, PID, or previous pelvic surgeries. So I'd like to really conclude here and say that the age of the woman and duration of infertility are still the most powerful prognostic indices for future live birth. A careful history and targeted investigations help in achieving a management plan. Cost-effective management is the dictum. Weigh the pros and cons of each treatment modality and decide on the one which is best suited and most effective for that particular couple who's sitting in front of you. And lastly, time to live birth is one of the key aspects. So I'd like to really thank each and every one of you for your attention. Due to paucity of time, I'm today at least unable to take some questions, but will always be available for you. And I can assure you that you're going to have some lovely webinars coming from ISAR on the 2nd and the 4th Thursday of every month for this whole year. We have wonderful national and international faculty lined up for you with beautiful subjects to discuss. Thank you.